Hello everyone, welcome to the Bodhi Academy. In today's video, we'll start with class 11, first chapter of biology, that is the living world. So in this chapter, we'll learn about the characters of living organisms, how we can define an organism as living, and also we'll learn about the vast variety of organisms, that is the diversity that we have on our planet Earth. Then we'll learn about the nomenclature, how these organisms are named, the classification, how these organisms are grouped together, and so on. So let us start with this chapter. So first of all, how do you define a living organism? Okay, so there will be certain characters or factors which will be associated to the word living. So one of the character that living organisms show is growth, right? Now can we say this growth is an defining property of living organisms? First of all, what is growth, right? So growth is an increase in the mass growth is increase in the mass or number of organisms. So growth is the increase in mass of the organism or in the number of organisms. So when we see we say that all the living organisms can grow. So all living organisms can grow. Okay, all living organisms exhibit growth. Now when we have simple unicellular organisms or single celled organisms, how do they grow? Okay, so they increase in their mass as well as they how will they increase in number? So they undergo cell division. Okay, from a single cell they will undergo cell division and divide into two daughter cells. So this is how they will grow in number. Now when we talk about plants, the cells in plants, they will continuously undergo cell division. They will keep on dividing to form new cells, and this is how their length, girth and everything will grow, right? So this is how the plants will grow, and this growth in the plants is observed throughout their lifespan. So this growth occurs throughout their lifespan. Then when we talk about animals, okay, so animals exhibit growth in size only up to a certain age. So in animals, the growth of cells, the general body growth is seen. So general body growth is seen only up to a certain age. For example, our height grows only up to only as long as we are teens, right? After that our height does not grow. But however, if we have any wound, okay, so there the cells will divide to replace the wounded cells, and new cells will be formed there. So in certain locations there will be growth occurring. For example, skin. As we know, the skin cells continuously are shed off and they are replaced by the new cells. So there we can observe growth in animals, whereas there will be no growth in general body mass, that is height and all. Weight can obviously grow depending on the food we eat. So now we say that all living organisms can grow. So growth is one of the characteristics of living organisms. But is it a defining property? Is growth a defining property? So let us see an example. So few of the non-living organisms, like non-living things, for example mountains or sand dunes, for example, we say that these also grow. So mountains and sand dunes, this can also grow. Okay, so how they grow? They can grow in size. Now how this growth will occur? Due to the accumulation of different substances on the surface. So a sand dune or a mountain can grow in size. So this was the initial mass or the volume, and this is the current. So we can say that the mountain or the sand dune has grown, but this growth which occurs is due to the accumulation of substances, and it is external. Okay, so only from the outside this growth is external, because all the substances have just deposited on the surface, whereas the growth in living organisms is always internal. The growth is from within. Okay, but since the growth in these non-living things is also seen, that is why we cannot say that growth is a defining property of life or living organism. So therefore growth is not a defining property. And we all know that dead organisms cannot grow. Then another characteristics of living organisms is reproduction, right? Almost all of the living organisms can reproduce. So the second is reproduction. Now why do organisms reproduce, or why reproduction is essential? So that reproduction helps us in survival from one generation to the next generation, right? If we do not reproduce, our species will not survive from generation to generation, will become extinct. So now can we say reproduction is a defining property of living organisms? Now we all know that from very minute or single celled microbes to the complex organisms, all of these organisms can reproduce. Now in single celled organisms, it is just cell division. Okay, that is how they reproduce to form their young ones. Whereas in plants and animals, we can the plants can either reproduce sexually or asexually, and in animals sexual reproduction is seen. So can we say reproduction is a defining property of life? No. Reproduction is also not a defining property of life. Why? Because there are certain living organisms which cannot reproduce or which do not reproduce, but they are certainly alive or living. For example, there are some infertile couples, human couples. Now these cannot reproduce. okay, but they are certainly living, right? Then another example is mule, which is a cross between a horse and a donkey, and these are also sterile animals, okay, which means that they cannot reproduce. Now let us move on to another characteristics. So the third is metabolism, okay. So we know that various chemical reactions takes place in our body for the different activities, for example digestion, then respiration, so all those there are various reactions, chemical reactions which takes place in our body, and the sum of all the chemical reactions that occur inside a body of a living organism is called metabolism, okay. Now all living organisms can metabolize, okay. Even a single celled organism such as the amoeba is able to metabolize and carry out all its functions. So all living organisms can metabolize. Now some of these organisms or some of the chemical reactions which occur in our body can also be conducted in a test tube, okay. So these can also be carried out in a test tube in laboratory conditions, but these are not living organisms, okay. These are certainly living reactions, but they are not living organisms, okay. They are not living organisms. Thus metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reaction which occur inside a body, okay. So these should occur inside a body, and that is why metabolism is a defining property. Thus metabolism is a defining property of life or living organisms. Then the next characteristics is consciousness, okay, or awareness of the surroundings and being able to respond to the environment. So the fourth is consciousness. Now what this means is an organism is able to sense what is going on in its surrounding, and it is able to respond to it with a proper response. So now as we know, all living organisms from minute microbes to the complex organisms can sense their environment and they can respond to it. So these external stimuli could be physical, chemical or biological. Now we can sense this stimulus using our different sense organs. Now we also know that plants can respond to light, then water, pollution, other different stress like drought, etc. They can also respond to the various chemicals. So almost all the living organisms, even the prokaryotes, can sense their surrounding and respond to it. Thus consciousness is a defining property of life. Defining property means there are no exceptions to this property. All the living organisms exhibit this property. So this is all about the properties of living organisms. Then diversity in the living world. So we know that on earth there are various kinds of organisms, from microbes, insects, various kinds of plants, animals, birds, reptiles and so on. So all these organisms, the number and types of organisms, all these form the biodiversity. Okay, so biodiversity basically refers to the number and type of organisms that are present on earth. So when we have such a vast variety of living organisms, how do we study all these organisms? So to study and to know these, there is a need to classify these or group these organisms in certain groups. Now even to classify these organisms, first we will need to name them. Okay, and the naming of organisms, needs to be standardized. Okay, so we need to standardize the naming of living organisms because only a certain type of organism should be known by a particular name. For example, we know that there are local names for different organisms, right? So a person living in one corner of the world will have a local name, for example for a dog. Okay, whereas a person living in another part of the world will have a local name in their language for the same organisms. Now when these two people will interact and they are talking about the same organisms, but since they are both using the local names, they won't be able to know that they are talking about the same organisms. Thus we need a name that is standardized, okay, that is accepted worldwide or globally. Okay, this name should be accepted globally, and so there was a need to standardize the names. Now this process of standardizing and giving the scientific names is called the nomenclature. Okay, now to assign these names, we need to first identify the different characters of the organism. So naming or nomenclature is only possible when the organism is described correctly, so that we know which organism the name is attached to, and this process is called identification. So for nomenclature, the identification of the organism should be proper. Now there are various procedures to assign a scientific name to an organism, and these names are acceptable to biologists all over the world. And for plants, the code which is used to name the plants is called the International Code for Botanical Nomenclature, and for animals it is International Code for Zoological Nomenclature, that is ICBN and ICZN. Now the scientific names for organisms, we generally use binomial nomenclature. Okay, so binomial nomenclature means the name or the scientific name will have two parts. Okay, the first one is called generic name. The first part is called generic name, and the second part is called specific epithet. Okay, second part is called specific epithet. Now this system of binomial nomenclature was given by Carolus Linnaeus. Now there are certain rules for assigning these binomial names to the organisms. Let us see what these rules are. For example, let us take the example of mango. So the scientific name of mango is Mangifera indica. The scientific name of mango is Mangifera indica. Here. So when a biological or a scientific name is written, it is generally in Latin. Okay, so all the scientific names are derived from the Latin language. They are Latinized or derived from Latin irrespective of their origin. The first word in a biological name represents the genus. Okay, so the generic name will represent the genus, while the second component, that is specific epithet, will represent the species. Now both these words in biological name, when it is handwritten, they are separately underlined. So for example, when I have to write Mangifera indica, when handwritten, both these names should be underlined separately, and the first alphabet of the generic name should always be capital, and the first alphabet of specific epithet should always be a small letter. And when these are printed or typed, these should be printed in italics. Okay, so see here, the scientific or the biological name is always italicized. Then this I have already said, the first word denoting the genus starts with a capital letter, while the specific epithet starts with a small letter. So this is all for in this video. The classification of the organisms will start in the next class. So thank you for watching my video. Please like, share and subscribe to the Bodhi Academy.